Lift up the France!
2024 has been a rather tumultuous year for Middle Eastern geopolitics, seeing several controversial conflicts and diplomatic tensions threatening to spill over and engulf the entire region in war. Rounding out the year saw one of the most significant events in recent Middle Eastern history, with the total collapse of the Syrian Arab Republic led by Bashar al-Assad, bringing an end to the Syrian Civil War, or at least this stage of it. Bashar al-Assad became president of Syria in 2000, succeeding his father Hafez. The reign of Assad is one that is controversial, to say the least. Some view him as a brutal dictator, others view him as a kind-hearted leader, and there are even some that only support him for pragmatic reasons, as they dislike the alternative even more. Nonetheless, the impact of Assad and his government will obviously still be felt both in Syria and across the world for many years to come. However, while Bashar al-Assad is a widely known name in the scene of international politics and current affairs, what most people don't know is his role in shaping the sport of football in Syria. Recognizing the raw power that a sport like football has on people, Assad's government utilized it in order to strengthen the cultural bonds among Syrians, especially as the civil war unfolded and Assad was trying to maintain the unity of the country under his rule. This was done through direct means, as the Syrian government itself controlled the Syrian Football Association, enshrining the national team as a symbol of the Assad government. Furthermore, the effects of the Syrian Civil War had a huge impact on both Syria's own domestic league and their clubs, as well as the national team and their players. While it is not known if Assad himself is a fan of the sport, it is clear that he realized its importance as a tool of statecraft. But who exactly is Bashar al-Assad? The second son of the previous president, Hafez al-Assad, Bashar took charge of Syria when his father passed away in 2000. Hafez al-Assad was a pivotal figure in Middle Eastern geopolitics throughout the latter half of the 20th century, building Syria into a nation under the ideology of Baathism. Gaining power after a series of 3 military coups, Hafez al-Assad ascended to the presidency, a position in which he remained from 1971 until his death in 2000. He had initially named his first son Bassel as his direct successor, but a car accident which took the life of Bassel in 1994 saw Hafez's political aims turn to his second son, Bashar. In his youth, Bashar al-Assad was a scholar and a doctor. After graduating from medical school and working as an army doctor in Damascus, he traveled to London, England to start training as an ophthalmologist. This is also where he would meet his future wife. But after the death of his brother Bassel, his father recalled him to Syria, and he immediately entered the military academy and started getting acclimated with the Syrian political scene. Then, with the passing of his father, Bashar al-Assad was elected president of Syria. Assad looked to continue much of the policies of his father and still maintain the legacy of the Syrian style of Arab Baathism. He also governed similarly, keeping the same structure to the state, although with more overtures to the Alawite community, the ethno-religious group that Assad and his family belonged to. Under the first decade of his tenure, he oversaw many affairs, such as the effect of neoliberal globalization on Syria's economy, the Damascus Spring, the Cedar Revolution, as well as the region-wide impact of the American-led invasion of Iraq and NATO's war on terror. Then in 2011, the Arab Spring permeated throughout the Middle East, and Syria was one of the largest spots of discontent. Following massive protest, Assad's response led to the formation of opposition groups and eventually the outbreak of the Syrian Civil War, a conflict which quickly descended into chaos. As Assad and his Baathist military attempted to maintain stability and national sovereignty, Western-backed opposition groups directed by the Syrian National Army aimed to overthrow the government and install a liberal democracy. Also among the opposition forces were Salafi jihadist groups like al-Qaeda, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and the al-Nusra Front, which later became Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who are all trying to overthrow the Assad regime and install their own Islamic caliphates while simultaneously allying with or fighting against the Syrian National Army forces, depending on the context. Minority communities such as the Kurds also formed many armed groups trying to secure independence. There was also heavy foreign intervention from external states such as the US, Iran, Russia, Turkey, and Israel, all for their own specific geopolitical reasons. While still technically ongoing, the war has ravaged Syria, killing around 600,000 people and displacing millions, leading to a refugee crisis while also destroying infrastructure all across the country and ruining the economy. As a result, Assad himself remains an extremely controversial figure both in Syria and on the global stage. Many attribute the large death toll to his military actions, while others dispute this claim by stating the opposition forces are to blame. Many criticize him for being a brutal authoritarian, while others say these accusations are harsh, or that this type of leader is what is required to rule a nation like Syria. Some also oppose Assad for religious reasons, given he is a secular leader, and there are also those abroad who are pro or anti-Assad for their own geopolitical reasons. Specifically within Syria, the opinions on Assad often fall along ethno-religious lines, as Syria is a very diverse society as well. As for the war itself, the first few years actually saw many significant victories for the opposition forces, capturing several major cities. The tide began to change once Russia and Iran intervened on behalf of the Syrian state. Another major turning point was the rise of ISIS, who attacked Assad's forces, the rebel opposition, and even other jihadist groups. The threat of ISIS grew large as they captured over half of the land in the country, but after military campaigns from the US, Russia, Hezbollah, and other Iranian-backed groups, they were defeated in 2017. The opposition forces began to sustain heavy losses, and by 2020, Assad maintained control over 70% of Syria. With ISIS gone, most of the rebels reduced to the outskirts of the nation, and peace deals coordinated with others, the fighting died down, and it seemed the conflict was essentially frozen for the time being. That all changed in late November 2024, when a joint operation between the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army and the jihadist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, launched an offensive against Aleppo. Due to economic strife from Western sanctions and serious suspicions of bribery or even a soft coup, Assad's Syrian Arab army completely capitulated and retreated against his orders. The offensive continued on after capturing Aleppo before reaching the cities of Hama and then Homs. With Syria's allies in Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia all occupied in global conflicts of their own, the anti-government forces stormed Damascus on December 8, 2024, toppling the government while Assad himself fled to Russia with his family. With the aftermath unfolding before our eyes, it remains to be seen what will happen to Syria as the sectarian lines that already divide the population look to be more evident than ever. However, one interesting impact of the fall of Assad directly relates to the state of Syrian football. The day after Damascus fell, the Syrian Football Association, or SFA, officially changed both the badge and the jersey of the national team. No longer will Syria's players don the red jerseys symbolizing Baathism. Now they wear green to represent the flag of the old Second Syria Republic, the same flag which was adopted by the opposition forces in the Civil War. This speaks directly to how the national team and the sport of football altogether operated in Syria, fundamentally as a symbol of Assad and his government. Like any other country, the national team is an extension of national unity, both from a legal and territorial point of view, but also from a cultural perspective. Therefore, sports are a great way for governments to unite their own people, and with football being the most popular sport in Syria, it was employed by the state for this very reason. The SFA has actually existed since 1936, but alongside this, Hafez al-Assad issued a legislative decree in 1970 which created the General Sports Federation, or GSF, as the highest sporting authority in the country. With the SFA dealing only with football, it falls under the umbrella of the GSF. Also, what is interesting about the GSF is that it is affiliated with the Ba'ath Party, meaning it was essentially under the control of the Assad government. This structure continued into the administration of Bashar al-Assad, which also saw the growth of football within Syria from a financial perspective. However, as the civil war began, this changed the dynamic of the national team for many. Those who opposed Assad then started to view the national team as a representation of Assad himself and refused to support it. On the other hand, Assad embraced the national team, using it to promote his image, as well as the values of Syrian nationalism and multiculturalism, and also as a marker of normalcy as the war unfolded. This was seen clearly during Syria's 2018 World Cup qualifying campaign. The Syrian national football team is not one with an illustrious history, and their chances of reaching the 2018 World Cup were already seen as slim given they had never qualified for a World Cup before. This was only made worse due to the ongoing civil war, which meant the team could not even play their home matches in Syria, having to play them in Malaysia instead. But after being drawn into Group E in the second round of qualification, the Castellón Eagles outperformed expectations by finishing ahead of Singapore, Afghanistan, and Cambodia, and only behind Japan. They then advanced to the next round, drawn into Group A, alongside Iran, South Korea, Uzbekistan, China, and Qatar. Pulling off some heroic results, Syria tied Iran 2-2 in Tehran with a dramatic last-minute goal, which sent them into the Asian playoffs as they finished third in the group. Syria's opponent in the playoffs were the Asian footballing giants of Australia. But in the first leg, a late goal from Omar al-Soma meant Syria earned a 1-1 draw in their de facto home stadium in Malaysia. Al-Soma actually opened the score in the second leg in Sydney, Australia, putting them ahead on aggregate. Shortly after, though, the legendary Australian striker Tim Cahill equalized, leaving the aggregate scoreline deadlocked at 2-2. The match remained an extremely tense affair, stretching all the way until extra time, where the Australians eventually broke through with another goal from Cahill after his header in the 109th minute. There was one last chance in the dying embers of the match as Omar al-Soma stepped up for a free kick, but unfortunately his powerful knuckleball crashed off the outside of the post, and Syria's epic journey came to a close with the final blow of the whistle from the referee. Australia then defeated Honduras in the Intercontinental Playoff and officially qualified for the 2018 World Cup in Russia. Despite not making it to the 2018 World Cup, each heroic performance along the way was celebrated by the Assad government. Throughout the streets of Damascus, the state set up giant television screens displaying each of the matches, with the famous 2-2 draw with Iran producing massive celebrations throughout the entire city. Assad would often invite the team to the presidential palace to celebrate the players, and during matches themselves, fans would unveil large banners with pictures of his face. These victories on the pitch also coincided with victories on the battlefield, as it was around this time in which ISIS was militarily defeated and the rebels were being pushed back far into the north. Over much of the country, fighting had begun to die down. In order to make his people feel comfortable again and to usher in a sense of normalcy, Assad heavily promoted this courageous campaign from the national team. It was also an opportunity to give hope to the Syrian people, as well as an opportunity for joy in these trying times. Obviously, the World Cup qualifying campaign invoked heavy levels of nationalism, patriotism, and faith in the government from those who supported Assad, further strengthening his legitimacy both at home and abroad. Even after the 2018 World Cup qualifiers, the importance of the national team to the Assad government remained strong. In recent years, games involving the Syrian national team acted as a diplomatic show of gratitude to Syria's foreign allies. The nature of Assad's Ba'athist government and the history of the region meant that Syria was naturally opposed to the United States, NATO, and the West in general. Then, with the civil war occurring, Syria was forced further into the arms of anti-Western states, specifically Russia and Iran. As a result, the games which the SFA scheduled were often against the national teams of countries who are also Russian or Iranian allies, or at the very least, fall into the broad anti-Western axis. The Syrian national team has played Iran more times than any other nation throughout the 2020s, but they also have played matches against China, Belarus, Venezuela, Iraq, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Yemen, Bahrain, Oman, and several others. In fact, the last match that the Syrian national team ever played under the Ba'athist flag was against Russia in Volgograd on November 19, 2024, just a week before the HTS-led offensive began. The significance that the national team has to the government was also seen in their choice of personnel. Despite the economic situation in Syria being dire from the war and also Western sanctions, Syria's team is so crucial to the nation's image that they gathered up enough funds to hire the famous Argentine coach Actor Cooper in 2023. Cooper is an extremely experienced manager, with his coaching career going as far back as 1993. He has a long and illustrious career, but he is most known for qualifying Mallorca to the Champions League and later reaching back-to-back Champions League finals with Valencia in 2000 and 2001. Within Arab football, he is also widely known for his tenure as the manager of the Egyptian National Team, where he reached the 2017 Africa Cup of Nations final and also the 2018 World Cup, the first World Cup Egypt qualified for in almost 30 years. While it was also a big money gamble for Syria to hire Cooper, it ultimately paid off. The expert Argentine manager was able to use his connections to recruit many players from the global Syrian diaspora and bolster the national team. In 2023, fellow Argentines Ezequiel Ham, Ibrahim Assar, and Halil Elias were all naturalized, as well as the Colombian Pablo Sabag. Outside of South America, the Swedish-born Ayhem Usu and Antonio Yakub were brought in, as well as the Russian-born Maxim Saryf. Then in early 2024, Mohamed Dahoud was convinced to switch nationalities from German to Syrian. With Cooper at the helm and this contingent of diaspora under his guise, Syria actually achieved their best ever performance at the 2023 Asian Cup in Qatar. Built around a solid defense and a well-organized structure, Syria tied Uzbekistan, only narrowly lost to Australia in a match they could have won before defeating India, sending them to the knockout rounds for the first time in their history. Their opponents in the round of 16 was none other than Iran, and after an extremely tight match that was tied 1-1 all throughout the regular 90 minutes and extra time, Iran was just able to advance after a penalty shootout. Many within the team also used their role in the national squad to show their support for Assad going back to the start of the Civil War. Probably the most notable incident of this was during the famous 2018 World Cup qualifying campaign when Syria played Singapore in November 2015. In the pre-match news conference, then manager Fajer Ibrahim, alongside some of the players such as Osama Omari, wore t-shirts displaying pictures of Bashar al-Assad. Ibrahim praised Assad during the press conference for, quote, fighting terrorists, and he claimed, quote, he is the best man in the world. When asked about Assad's own relationship to the team, he said, quote, our president follows us every step. He supports us, we play for our country, and for him also. Many players within the squad also made their support known throughout the years as well, characterizing the national team as a representation of all of Syria, regardless of ethnic or religious differences, as the captain Abdul Razak al-Hussein said during the World Cup qualifying campaign. However, while supporters of Assad view the national team as a wonderful symbol of Syrian pride, culture, and hope, those who oppose Assad view it as a mark of oppression and sports washing. While many of the players and coaches from the official national team were pro-Assad, there were also many who had the complete opposite perspective, with some even boycotting the team as a result. One of the most prominent examples was Firas al-Khatib, who is Syria's all-time top scorer and is considered by some to be the best Syrian footballer of all time. After a bombing campaign in his hometown of Homs, al-Khatib announced he would boycott the team, sparking mass support from some and backlash from others. However, in 2017, al-Khatib announced he was thinking of rejoining the national team for their World Cup bid. He refused to give reasons as to why, with some speculating that he was convinced to do so by the government or that he had given up on the ideas of the revolution. But regardless, it was a decision that weighed heavily on him. Speaking to a reporter, he stated, quote, whatever happens, 12 million Syrians will love me and the other 12 million will want to kill me, showing that the division from the Civil War had seeped into Syrian football as well. Eventually, al-Khatib did rejoin the national team and played until his retirement in 2019. Omar al-Soma, the player who was pivotal in Syria's 2018 World Cup qualifying campaign with his late equalizer against Iran and both his goals against Australia, was also in a similar boat. After Syria won the 2012 West Asian Championship, he celebrated by waving the white, black, and green flag of the revolution, and this, coupled with his failure to complete his military service, meant he was banned from the national team. But eventually, he was recalled and returned to the pitch years later. Several other players had also left the team, but eventually changed their minds, such as Musab Balus, who allegedly sheltered rebel fighters and had suspicious amounts of money leading to his arrest. After an alleged stint in prison, he rejoined the national team and finished out his career. Over time, this has built the assumption that those who play for the national team are public supporters of Assad, which goes hand in hand with the image of the team itself being a symbol of the Syrian president. Some even speculate that while many players genuinely support their leader, others on the team are only doing so out of fear or payment. Once the Assad government fell in December, some of the players on the current national team spoke out in support of the rebellion. Omar al-Soma changed his position again, celebrating the fall of Assad on social media. A few other players shared similar posts, such as Muhammad Aniyaz, Ammar Ramadan, and Ahmad Madania. On the other hand, players who remained pro-Assad did not make their opinions that clear, possibly out of fear of repercussions. At the same time, however, there was also several other players who spoke out against Assad and did not return to the team. Firas al-Ali was a defender for the national team, but once he discovered that 3 of his cousins were among the protesters who were killed, he fled Syria and now lives in a refugee camp in Turkey. Swedish-born Luai Chanko denounced what he saw as corruption in the Assad government and refused to play any longer. Mohamed Jadou, who was the captain of the U-17 Syrian team, which played at the 2015 U-17 World Cup in Chile, escaped Syria on a boat to Italy and eventually settled in Germany. There were also many Syrian footballers who lost their lives as a result of the war. Jihad Kassab, a former defender from the national team, was arrested for pro-rebellion activity and was sent to the infamous Sednaya prison in 2014, where he died 2 years later. Some say that he was tortured to death for his beliefs, while others say he was executed for an attempted robbery and murder of an officer. Abdul Basit al-Sarut was a goalkeeper for the national team, but he joined the revolution early on, leading many demonstrations in his hometown of Homs as a charismatic speaker. He eventually became a commander in the Free Syrian Army and later the jihadist splinter group Jaish al-Izza. He was also suspected of having pledged allegiance to ISIS by al-Nusra, given some pro-ISIS statements that he made. But in 2019, he was killed by a Syrian army artillery shell during the northwestern offensive by Assad's forces. There were also other players who were simply killed in the crossfire, such as Yusuf Suleiman, when a mortar aimed at Assad's palace in Damascus hit the hotel attached to the Tishrin Stadium, killing him and injuring several of his teammates. Many Syrians across the world supported their national team, but there were also many who actively rooted against the team in defiance of Assad. Even during the iconic 2018 World Cup qualifying campaign, there were fans who wished to see Syria fail in their qualification bid. In fact, throughout Germany, Turkey, and Lebanon, exhibition matches were played between local teams and a Free Syria squad, featuring players and coaches from the millions of refugees who fled Syria. These teams would wear green rather than red and would rally around the 3-starred black, white, and green flag of the Syrian opposition forces. Many of the refugees left specifically to flee Assad and are supporters of the rebellion. To them, this Free Syrian exhibition team was more of a true representation of their country than Assad's selection. Outside of the national team, the Civil War also had a huge impact on the Syrian Premier League. Founded by the SFA in 1966, the league grew massively into 2000s as the Assad government started heavily investing in the league, resulting in a massive improvement of football on the pitch. In the modern era, the format of the league was a typical round-robin tournament featuring 14 teams from across the country with a promotion and relegation system, starting in August and ending in May of the next year. However, during the 2010-11 season, the entire league was suspended with only about half of the games played due to the outbreak of the Civil War. The subsequent 2011-12 season saw a complete format change out of necessity. Since the previous season technically did not finish, the SFA decided that no clubs would be relegated, but the 2 top teams from the second division would be promoted. Then the league was split into 2 groups of 8, with the top 4 teams from either group playing each other in a playoff to decide the league winners, while the bottom 4 would go into another playoff to see who would get relegated. The season also started several months later than usual. As the war got worse and the Assad government suffered initial losses at the hands of the rebels, the 2013 Syrian Premier League season saw even more changes. Instead of a normal schedule from fall to spring, the season started in February 2013 and concluded in September. The dual group format remained from last season, but this time around, all matches were played in Damascus, as this was the only city in which the government could guarantee the safety of the players. As the years progressed, the status of the Syrian Premier League was actually a good litmus test for how successful the war effort from the Assad government was. By 2014, the 2-group format stayed, but the top 3 teams would then go on to a group of their own to decide the winner. All the matches were now played in both Damascus and Latakia. Afterwards, the 2014-15 season was able to go back to the normal fall to spring schedule. The next few years were the same until the 2016-17 season, when they were able to transition back to a regular round-robin tournament, all in one league table. Matches were also played all across Syria by this point, as the situation was safe enough. A major turning point was the Aleppo derby between al-Ittihad and al-Hurriya in January 2017, the first time this match was actually able to be played in Aleppo in 5 years. This match was a massive spectacle, with media attention covering every second, as this was characterized as the city returning back to its normal peaceful self. A large banner of Bashar al-Assad was even unfurled by the cheering fans at the Al-Hamadaniya Stadium, which was repaired after it was heavily damaged in the early stages of the war. By contrast, in the current 2024-25 season, all matches were suspended until further notice on December 4th, 2024, following the HTS-led offensive, with no certainty for the future ahead. Whether it be the Syrian National Team, the players and the coaches, or the Syrian Premier League, it is clear that the state of football in this country was seen as a symbol of Bashar al-Assad's government. This created an environment which saw those who supported the government align with the national team, while those who opposed Assad also opposed the team. The concept of governments using the national team, or just football in general, to promote nationalism and popularize a regime, all while forcing the members of the team to support their own views, is not unique to Syria. In fact, it can be seen all throughout history in nations all across the world. In the West, we often see this being used in a derogatory way and as an opportunity to chastise what is perceived as dictatorships, authoritarian regimes, or just illiberal or anti-Western states in general. In reality, every country on earth that has a national team uses it to legitimize their own power and promote the values of the regime, while also forcing the players to toe the line. The only difference is how explicit and heavy-handed these states will go to enforce this. Similarly, the connection between nationalism and football is often talked about in a negative manner, but this is also a short-sighted analysis. The international scope of football, not to mention the very nature of the game invoking the us versus them dynamic, means nationalism is inseparable from football. Furthermore, the use of football to promote national unity and strengthen the bond between fellow countrymen is hardly a bad thing. As for Syria, it remains to be seen what will come of the nation now that both Bashar al-Assad and Baathism are gone. Will Syria become a Western-backed liberal democracy like the revolution initially intended, or will it become a Salafi fundamentalist caliphate? Will there even be a unified sovereign country, or will it be a failed state divided among ethno-religious lines? Perhaps we can look to other nations who experienced Arab Spring uprisings like Egypt, Libya, and Yemen as possible futures. And while the Syrian Premier League is still currently suspended, the national team has a schedule friendly against Kuwait on December 15th, 2024. In fact, by the time you're watching this video, the game will most likely have already concluded. But for the first time, the Syrian national team will no longer wear the jerseys draped in the historic Baathist red, instead wearing the green to represent the revolution. What lies ahead for Syrian football in general is of course inherently tied to whatever will happen to the Syrian nation in the future.